When 10-year-old Gabrielle Magalhães of Brazilândia, Brazil, woke up on the morning of March 21st, 2020, the last thing likely to be going through the young girl's mind was that this would be the last morning she would ever get to see. Yet at some point during the day, Gabrielle's fate would become sealed, as the little girl would end up becoming the victim in a most unthinkable crime. Before we dive into today's installment, just one or two quick things. First of all, the story, even though it's said to have really shook the small municipality in which it occurred, coverage in the United States has been discouragingly sparse, and I'm guessing it isn't much better in other countries either. And yet, you're going to understand why in a minute. This is a story that needs to be told. One thing that bothers me most each time I revisit this case in my mind is just how this child's death seems like it couldn't have been more in vain if some writer had scripted it out that way. And so to me, that's just all the more reason to get this out there. The more people this little girl's story reaches, the more it feels like this beautiful child's death may always remain cruel and senseless, but it doesn't have to have been in vain. Don't forget to heed the warning at the top, because the following content is definitely not going to be for everyone. Oh, and there is just one more thing before we begin. I've done my best to uncover the correct pronunciations wherever possible, but there are going to be times when it won't be too pretty. Just know I'm trying my best, so thank you. Beyond that, thank you for joining me for the story of Gabrielle Magalhães, a girl who was taken from this world way too soon. Let's begin. It's Saturday, March 21st, 2020 in Brazilândia, a small city about 382 kilometers or roughly under 245 miles from the state of Mato Grosso do Sul's capital known as Campo Grande. It's not more than 11 or 12,000 people that reside in this town. One of those residents happens to be the vibrant 10-year-old Gabrielle Magalhães de Sousa. Gabby, as she's affectionately known and as we'll be calling her throughout the story as well, lives at home along with a brother 3 years her senior, whose name the news outlets have omitted for privacy reasons, and their biological mother, a then 29-year-old hairdresser by the name of Adelaide Magalhães. Also at the residence, in place of the kid's biological father, is mom's new husband, 47-year-old Andre Luis Ferreira Piauí. And thanks to this stepfather's copious Facebook uploads and his neglecting to make his profile private, it seems there may be another small child in the house, perhaps, but this is immaterial to the story, so out of respect for the innocent, there's no need to bring this up ever again. As I'm taking more of a look at the photographs uploaded by both Adelaide and Andre, it would appear to an outsider that things are all right within the household. It looks like you're a normal, happy, loving place to be. Mom and her latest beau, of course, seem pretty close. They evidently love to snap and post virtually the same selfie of themselves at every department store that they go to. And even Gabby herself is pictured among her stepdad's many uploads. In each picture, the girl is all smiles, again, as if she's just your average happy-go-lucky kid. But of course, as is so often the case with Facebook, images can be horribly deceiving. Because whether it's just because hindsight is 20/20 or else because it's real, even when she's smiling ear to ear, there seems to be a certain sadness behind Gabby's otherwise warm, sparkling eyes. The unfortunate reality is that for at least the last couple of years, and possibly more, Gabby has been harboring a really dark secret. The secret being that on repeated occasions, the man that her mother Emily is so head over heels with has been Gabby in the most unimaginable of ways. And for the sake of keeping this content as viewer-friendly as possible, even considering the circumstances we have to work with here, hopefully you can use your own imagination to figure out what I mean when I refer to the worst and most unforgivable kind. Since before she was even into double digits, Gabby has been suffering through this unspeakable torture, more or less alone, not knowing if and whom she should tell, afraid that if she does so, there may be repercussions. Well, it's on Saturday afternoon that Gabby has made the monumental decision to confide in her mom the secret that's been eating at her for so long. She's afraid pretty naturally of how her mother might react. After all, this is her mother's own husband that's being accused, but ultimately Gabby holds to the faith that her mother, who surely loves her, will ultimately do the right thing and help her. So as I picture it on this Saturday, just shortly past noon, with stepdad asleep in his room and her older brother out to play a little ball, Gabby sees her mom and she approaches her. Suffice it to say, things don't go quite the way Gabby had hoped. In fact, things go far worse than most of us could probably ever have imagined. It's nearing about 2:30 p.m. and Gabby's older brother is returning home from playing ball. When he says he walks in on the two of them, his mother and his sister, and the two of them, meaning mostly his mother, are engaged in a screaming match, more or less. At once, the boy can clearly see that she's absolutely furious. At first, he's not sure what this is about, of course, but Emily doesn't hesitate in volunteering to fill him in. Turns out that in the early afternoon, as Gabby's stepdad lay in his room, sound asleep, and as her 13-year-old brother was out shooting some ball, Gabby had taken a deep breath and, doing her best to ignore those butterflies, she approached Emily. Gabby next proceeds to confide to Emily the ghastly, awful secret that's been slowly gnawing at her heart and soul over the past years. And we also know that Gabby's confession ends up not going quite as the little girl had hoped. Instead of offering her only daughter the reassurance, support, and love that she so desperately needs at this time, Emily immediately flies into a rage and starts screaming at poor Gabby. And Mom's not screaming out of anger for what her dirty husband has done to her own flesh and blood. Instead, she's raging at Gabby, angry with poor Gabby for revealing to her what she's just revealed. Her reaction is literally beyond logical comprehension. And now, upon seeing her son come in, Emily stops yelling at Gabby just long enough to turn and acknowledge his presence by speaking to him in the third person about his little sister. She relays to the boy that Gabby has just come to her to accuse her stepfather of her. She continues telling him chillingly that Gabby, quote, will not live any longer because the girl is a liar, end quote. Now, if I may just make a quick interjection here, I do realize that on a rare occasion a child may make a false accusation of this kind. Maybe they've been coached into it, or maybe it's a plea for attention and they don't really understand the severity of it all, but let me just clear this up right off the bat. In Gabby's case, it is with 100% certainty that this was no false accusation, as this will be proven later on, but regardless, suffice it to say this mother's reaction is absolutely astonishing. As a parent, for the safety of your child, physical and mental and otherwise, you need to err on the side of caution and give your child the benefit of the doubt. If you love your child, it's my belief that just instinctively, that's what you do. But in all honesty, in the case of Emily and her daughter, I don't believe for 1 second that she actually believes that her daughter is lying about the... And later on, we'll touch on a couple of things that gives us reason to believe that she may have actually known for a long time. But be that as it may, what she's chosen to do is lash out at the little girl. At some point, probably as she's still raging on like a lunatic, Emily begins rummaging around the house until she successfully produces some solder wire. When the boy sees it at that time, he figures that the mother plans to use it to hit Gabby with. Not as if beating his sister with solder wire should have been an acceptable thing to anyone either, but the sad realization that this family's interactions are starting to reveal is that these kids seem to have become incredibly desensitized to this kind of, for lack of a better term, probably just as the years have gone by. The nonchalant way in which the teen boy talks about his sister would know and then receive is just heart-wrenching. Now, just one more thing I'll go ahead and mention right now, not because I think it explains or excuses why the mother is acting so irrationally, but rather because I do think it does possibly exacerbate her behavior, even if slightly. What I'm talking about is that, as she's going to be telling authorities later on, Emily has been drinking alcohol and consuming rather heavily by the time she runs into Gabby on that day. But again, so that I'm being perfectly clear, I am not saying that the and alcohol made Emily act the way that she acts on this fateful day. I am only acknowledging that it's quite possible that they had a hand in making it just a little bit easier for her to do what she's about to do. To wit, at some point after she's found the wire, she now states, quote unquote, "I'm going to end her life because I don't want my daughter to be talked about badly." Everything she's said, not to mention the woman's reaction as a whole, just hints to an impaired sense of logic, and aren't helping the situation. Now, it's estimated to be around 5 p.m. by the time that Emily finally orders both Gabby and her brother to get in the car with her. They start to drive, and Emily doesn't say where they're going, but she does make sure to bring that solder wire with her. It's been hours by this point, and she's had ample time to change her mind, but she isn't. As the car makes its way farther out of the more urban area of Zealandia, even in spite of the mother's threats to end Gabby's life, the son still doesn't wholeheartedly believe that's what's going to happen. Instead, the teen figures the mother's probably just looking for a good spot where she can pull the car over and beat her up. Again, to him it's sadly nothing too out of the ordinary. It's finally somewhere nearby the city dump, only about 6 kilometers or under 4 miles out of town, that Emily finally turns off of the street they're on and onto a side road. After driving forward a little over a few more meters, the mother decides they've reached their destination. It's a remote location with not a sign of life in sight. The road is flanked with vast eucalyptus plantations and an apparent woodsy area. And as there are actually at least 2 different variations of this story, at this point we're just going to first run through what occurred in a vague or general sense, and then we'll work to add in all versions of competing details later on. So in this desolate woodsy area, as mentioned, Emily has parked the car and ordered that both her children get out, which they somewhat hesitantly yet obediently do. On screen, you should now be able to see either a photo or a video footage of the actual location where the attack actually took place, and of course, the same location we're talking about right now. Essentially, no hesitation, the mother at once busts out the electrical wire, and rather than just using it to hit Gabby with, as her brother had previously anticipated, Emily places the wire around her daughter's throat and starts to strangle her with it, all as the little girl begs for her life. At some point during this scuffle, where Gabby is trying in vain to fight off her much bigger, much stronger mother, but during which the mother is succeeding in overpowering the child, Gabby gets knocked to the floor. Emily continues what she can to ensure her hands remain tightly gripping the wire that she's secured around her 10-year-old daughter's neck. Don't forget that Gabby's only crime or wrongdoing in all of this has been that she spent the last few years of her childhood getting by her mother's lover, and then after that, she dared to think she could confide all of this in the woman who gave birth to her. Because of this, Emily is now choking Gabby with electrical wire, and should Gabby somehow manage to live through this ordeal, this isn't even close to the worst of what awaits her. When it's said that Gabby gets shoved to the ground, she lands in a conveniently placed hole, and it's at this point that the mother, Emily, starts to bury her daughter inside the hole upside down. And still alive, Emily at this point turns to her son, calling at him to come and help her finish the job. When the boy hesitates even the slightest amount, the mother threatens him too. She warns him that he can either choose to come help or else risk suffering the same fate as that of his sister. Not really seeing any other way out of it, he obliges, and together the mother-son pair work to kick dirt into the hole and do what they can to conceal the girl's burial, should anybody happen to come across the spot, deserted as it is. Once Emily decides she's satisfied, next the mom and son hop back into the car. The boy gets dropped off back by their home, while after that, and this is one part of the story that just seems so strangely callous and downright sickening to me, Emily, having just finished strangling and then burying her own daughter upside down in a hole, drives herself down to a bar somewhere in town where she sits and she has a beer. I'm sorry, I don't know, it might seem like a sort of trivial thing, but for some reason, I just find it so callous and heartless that a person could even think about having a beer after doing something as atrocious as what Emily has just done to her own little girl. It is what it is, and that's what she does. And now, get this, okay? I guess it must be at some point during that beer that this mother gets the idea into her head to actually get in the car after this and drive back to the crime scene once again. It's a strange thing to conceive of doing, but something evidently seems to be nagging at Emily. So I think in hearing that she's decided to return to the crime scene, the location where she's just buried her 10-year-old daughter alive, any rational person might be wondering if perhaps by some miracle Emily has actually had a change of heart. Perhaps she's had a prick of conscience, as they say, sitting there drinking her beer. Perhaps the drugs are wearing off, reality is slowly starting to take hold, and hence the guilt is now starting to slowly seep in as well. Maybe the reason she's decided to return to the site is because she's hoping and praying that it isn't too late to somehow try and save her daughter. Except that's not Emily. Later, she'll vaguely explain that she's only returning so that she can check up on her daughter's status. And as the mother will later testify, at this time she finds that the little girl is in fact still alive. So at this point, the mother's disposition is unclear. We don't know if she's still ragingly angry. We don't know if once at the burial site she kicks more dirt over the hole to speed the process up. And we don't know if she says anything more to Gabby at that point. Does she converse with the girl from outside the hole? Does she chastise her even more? We don't know. What we do know is that given yet another chance, her daughter is still alive and fighting for her life in there. What we know is that Emily does not save her. Instead, she does what she does while she's there and drives off once more. Later on, she's going to return to the burial site just one final time. Again, it's presumably to check up on whether Gabby is still breathing or not yet again, and it's actually the second time during which the mother notes her daughter is no longer alive. Apparently now satisfied, the mother departs from the scene for the final time. At approximately 9:20 p.m. that same day, Emily walks into the local civil police station to file a missing persons report. She explains to the officers that her daughter Gabby disappeared after she dropped Gabby and her brother off at the town square earlier that day. Less than several hours later, however, just shortly after midnight, Emily picks up the phone and dials 190, which is the local code for calling the military police. Astonishingly, she then proceeds to confess to police all that she's done, and basically she turns herself in. She admits to the crime, albeit omitting the fact that her son was there, and she states that she acted alone. More specifically, in this first version of her story that she gives right now, she claims that she first dropped off her son at the square before proceeding with Gabby alone to the site where she would proceed to take the child's life. Thiago Passos, the chief of police, felt that when Emily spoke, she did so with a clear lack of remorse for her recently murdered daughter. He would state his early belief that Emily's motive for the crime had been jealousy, coupled with a fear of seeing her husband be arrested. Subsequent to Mom's confession, both she and her son are invited to come down to the station the following day for a more formal questioning. And so on Sunday, March 22, 2020, they both show up at the station ready to tell their stories to the police. The scratches on the young man's legs are readily noticeable, and when seeing just how fresh these lacerations appear to be, investigators become suspicious about the boy's true level of involvement. Detectives decide to alter their line of questioning slightly, and so apart from his mother with child counselors present, the boy makes the decision to cooperate with detectives and answer their questions as truthfully insofar as he knows. For starters, the boy informs the police how their mother had become enraged following an accusation Gabby had made against the kid's stepfather, Andre. The boy also vouched for the validity of Gabby's accusations, telling the authorities that he knew more or less for fact that his sister was frequently forced to succumb to and at the hands of their mother's new husband. It was indeed not unlikely that the mother didn't already know about what was happening to her daughter either. The teen adds that Emily promised Gabby to kill her if she continued to talk about it. Next, the boy explains to police everything that had taken place following Gabby's confession, or at least what he knew that had occurred after he'd arrived home. He tells them how, while Andre had continued to sleep, Emily had grabbed some electrical wire, after which he and Gabby had obediently accompanied her out to a deserted road shortly past the municipal landfill just outside Brucelandia. Shortly down the road, the boy continues, Mom stops the engine. By the looks of this road and the dense forest beyond it, for the first time he starts to wonder if perhaps the mother's intentions are different than in previous times. And he just doesn't have a good feeling about this at all. And so the boy describes when they're ordered out of the car, both he and his sister Gabby decide at once to try and make a run for it. Emily sees this and she quickly chases after Gabby. Unfortunately, the mother proves to be too quick for the little girl, who the mother swiftly snatches up. When grabbed by her mother, Gabby starts screaming, and in response, Emily throws her to the ground. The boy confirms that she doesn't hesitate to start her assault on Gabby. He states that while at first Gabby can be heard pleading for her life to be spared, it's when he hears silence that he dares to inch a bit closer to the pair to see what's taking place. Well, much to his horror, there's Emily. She has his little sister pinned to the ground, and she's now simply strangling her with that very same wire that she's brought with her. Following these repeated asphyxiation attempts, the boy testifies that, as per the mother's orders, he assists her in placing Gabby's body into a hole in the ground and then burying her, all still while the girl is very much alive, he adds. The boy lets them know of his participation. It's only because he now fears for his own safety as well. In addition to threatening him with a fate like his sister's, the mother also threatens him with a tire iron if he doesn't comply. The boy's attorney would later make a statement that, quote, Emily said that he was already involved in the act, and so he had no choice but to end up staying at the location witnessing these atrocities, end quote. Even I must personally just say that in this little boy's defense, if you've already seen your own mother go totally crazy on your sister and you've just seen her strangle her with electrical wire to the point that she's going in and out of consciousness, and she's now burying her alive to top everything all off, I'm sorry, but I don't think this boy had any reason not to believe his mother at this point. That is, in the sense that she wouldn't probably hesitate in hurting him just as well. The fact that at first the boy took off once the car had stopped, intending to run away, also seems to indicate that the kid wanted nothing to do with this. He was, in other words, an unwilling participant in his mother's crime. At this initial interrogation, the boy at last alleges that back at the scene, the mother throws dirt over Gabby's body and she's, quote, even stepping over it to punch the earth, end quote. Finished at the scene for now, Emily drops her son off somewhere close to home. According to his version, the boy states that once at home, he goes in, takes a shower, and afterwards, he passes the time by playing on his cell phone. It's later that evening that his mother returns home, he says, and upon her return, she confesses her crime to her husband, Andre, and she also tells him of her intentions to turn herself in, as we already know that a couple hours later she does. As Gabby's brother is telling investigators his version of events, meanwhile, presumably in an attempt not to implicate her 13-year-old in her crime, Emily sticks to her version of the story wherein she claims that she alone was present at the site and that furthermore she acted alone in both the murder and concealment of the evidence. In the end, however, police aren't buying it, as they find her son's story to be the more plausible one in most regards. As the boy had told investigators, in the end, they'd simply driven off, leaving his sister there in that hole, still alive. When asked how he knows that she was still alive when they left her, the teen replies that he knows it because before they left, he could still see her moving her feet and he could still hear her crying out for help from inside the hole. The boy points out that this is even after the mother had already covered her with all the dirt and debris that she could manage. Shortly after the mother and son are questioned, the stepfather, Andre Luis, would also be called into the police station for his own little Q&A with the police. Once there, Andre denies the accusations against Gabby, admitting that he spent some time alone with her once, but insisting that nothing untoward ever took place. Andre is cleared of any implications of Gabby's death, but police find him ultimately less credible when it comes to his denial of. Andre is therefore eventually arrested for the against Gabby, and he's soon shipped off to Badagassu prison to start serving out his 20-year prison term. And with this, in the end, for Emily Magalhaes, it would appear that whatever her motive, the killing would ultimately serve no purpose for anyone whatsoever. Because if her main motivation had been to protect her husband against being looked upon as with him being jailed for the assault right now, it would appear as if the mother's objective failed. An aspect which certainly doesn't help to make this case any less tragic than it already is. Now, as for the boy, Gabby's brother, while he's initially transported to a juvenile detention center, the Inpatient Educational Unit, or UNI for short, he is released into the custody of his biological father only a few days later. Uncertain at first as to his best placement, the adolescent's testimony, it would turn out, would end up being the one most consistent with what the case coroner had found upon examining the child's body post-mortem. Specifically, the cause of death was determined to be mechanical asphyxia due to chest compression, seeing as the mother would later remark that she had believed Gabby to be dead when she buried her. This was an important finding, as it was in line with the boy's claim that Gabby had been alive when she was buried. Last but not least, it's also the boy's description that initially led investigators to the exact location of the crime, and hence the location of the body, to begin with. One of the first to arrive at said crime scene was a military police sergeant, known in the press as just Leandro. Even having amassed 27 years, nearly 3 entire decades of service and experience, Leandro still would state on record that the coldness exhibited by the mother was outright frightening. In his own words, he would state, "It's scary. It's a monstrous and brutal thing to see a mother do this to her daughter and not show any regrets." Now, following her initial arrest, Emily had remained incarcerated while awaiting her day in court. Nonetheless, the defense would put into motion early on that the trial be moved to a neighboring city, this being out of fear that jurors' opinions in Brazillandia had been tainted by the rampant negative media coverage. Defense argued that they worried about Emily's ability to receive a fair trial in her hometown. And apparently the court agreed. Emily's actions did seem to have left an entire town in a state of bewilderment and disgust, and so the trial was moved to the nearby, more populated municipality of Tres Lagoas. 10 months later, in early 2022, Emily's trial would begin, with Emily herself scheduled to take the stand on the morning of January 12, 2022. Other witnesses were set to testify that same day, including Emily's own teenage son and a couple of law enforcement officials. Besides that, One of the more persuasive and tantamount parts of evidence would come also that same Wednesday, courtesy of the coroner that had been assigned to the case. Today, this coroner's testimony would be read in its entirety in front of the jury. One of the most impactful statements made was in fact a personal one, in which the coroner remarked in all honesty that, "In all my career, I've never seen such a horrible scene," quote unquote. The details leading to this conclusion were not released to the public for the sake of preserving the integrity of the victim. Nonetheless, many reports have noted that, according to the police assigned to this case, the consensus appeared to be that, in addition to signs of strangulation and asphyxiation, her body also consisted of numerous injuries, lacerations that police surmised were indicative of possible torture or perhaps previous. Although these conclusions remain speculative, the neoscopic examination performed on the body did corroborate absolutely the presence of these wounds. In all likelihood, a very moving presentation. The testimony that most in attendance probably couldn't wait to hear from is the testimony of the defendant herself. Appearing from the Tres Lagoas Women's Penitentiary via video conference, the mother accused of torturing then burying her own daughter alive would finally have her testimony heard before a judge and jury. The presiding judge, Judge Rodrigo Pedrini Marcos, would open by asking the accused whether she felt okay answering questions about the case, to which Emilade replied, quote unquote, "I'll tell you the parts I remember." Emilade stated for the record, as it appeared that she wanted the court to really know this, that on the day of the murder, she had, quote unquote, as a result, she explains, she experienced blackouts and couldn't recall too much about what had happened on the day of Gabby's murder. But the mother insists somewhat astonishingly she loved her daughter, and on that day, she had just been too inebriated to know what she was doing. When asked again about her motive for killing Gabby, this time around she states simply, "I was out of my mind." Asserting her memory is spotty at best, Emilade doesn't deny the murder, nor does she try to retract her confession, but she testifies that the first thing she remembers is getting into the car with Gabby and her brother at about 5 p.m. She also alleges that she has no recollection of the drive to the site where Gabby would experience her life for what Emilade decided would be her final time. The mother alleges that her memory picks up a bit after they've reached that final destination. As she herself states, "I remember getting out of the car with Gabrielle, going through the fence and putting the cord around her neck." She states that Gabby ends up fainting as a result of the strangulation, and Emilade is vehement that she falls into a hole in the ground by accident. At that point, she adds, she thought that Gabby was already dead, stating that there at the scene, she, quote, "didn't mean to put her in there," end quote. The mother is also insistent that she didn't dig the hole that Gabby fell into or that she would be buried in. In elaborating on how this so-called accident went down, Emilade testifies that during her attempt to strangle her daughter, she herself accidentally fell into the hole, and that it was by virtue of the tight grip that she had on the wire that was wrapped around her child's neck that Gabby fell in with her. Now, why in the world Emilade doesn't at that point have any sort of maternal instinct to tell her to at least try and lift her daughter back up out of the hole is one of those things I have to just accept that I'll never understand. And yet at the same time, I also have to remind myself I would never be strangling my child in the middle of a field or anywhere in the first place. So, at any rate, the mother next explains that with the both of them now in the hole, she uses her daughter's leverage to help her climb back out of the hole. She describes that when she leans on her daughter to support herself in the act of climbing back out, the act of putting all of her weight on her 10-year-old daughter's much smaller frame, causes Gabby to sink into this hole even deeper. Oh, and she goes face first. In the mother's own words, quote unquote, "She sank into the hole upside down." And so then, since reportedly they'd both just fallen into this hole by accident, the judge inquires as to how come after climbing out herself, why at this point doesn't the mother also get her daughter out of the hole? And this is where it gets a little bit confusing. I think particularly for those of us who are not able to understand Portuguese and hence any of the televised testimony, but from what we've heard Emilade say before, that is, that she believes her daughter was already deceased at this time, one might think Emilade would say, "Well, Your Honor, I thought my daughter was dead, which is why I left her in the hole." As unceremonious as a burial as this would be, all that she really responds with is the following: "I can't say I couldn't believe it. I didn't know what I was doing." By her own account, as opposed to helping her daughter out of the hole, Emilade watches as Gabby slides in deeper, and then after filling the hole with dirt, she proceeds to use dirt and dead animal skins to cover the top of the opening. When asked as to whether her son assisted her at any point throughout this ordeal, Emily confesses that at the moment she started to bury Gabby, her son burst into tears and he at first attempted to run away crying. Of course, the mother wasn't about to just let that happen. Emily states, "I started screaming for him to help me," and she describes how she quote-unquote threw a piece of earth in the hole. Emily admits to having ordered the brother at this point to participate in doing the pizarro around and atop the hole so as to leave no traces. If anyone else out there is curious, as I was, as to the meaning of pizarro, well, here you go. Courtesy of highnative.com, one user explains that, quote, "It's a dancing style very popular in the northeast of Brazil," end quote. And I really have no further comment on that. It's been observed that throughout Emily's testimony, which by the way is something I'll be linking to shortly on the official website for this channel, found at trueandtwisted.com, that the mother seemingly showed no regret. It is said that the only time she cried is when the prosecutor read a letter that had been written by Gabby to her, in which the daughter was apologizing to her mother for a mess that she had made. It was a handwritten letter with a doodle of a heart wearing a pair of eyes and a smile. And roughly translated, it read as follows. "Mom, I love you. Mom, thank you for existing. You're the most beautiful, smartest person, and the nicest mother in my entire life and in the entire world. I love you from the bottom of my heart. Mom, you are the dearest person in my life." The letter continues for a short time after that and consists of Gabby, well, more or less apologizing for being such a terrible child. "You talk, but I don't listen to you," the letter goes on, followed by a promise that from now on, "I will try to obey you." Back in the courtroom, January 12, 2022. Now, when asked about the abuse against her daughter, Emily was rigid in her stance that she had never been informed that any abuse was taking place and that, to this day, in court, it remains somewhat of a mystery to her, which, I'm sorry, is a crock. Now, while we could spend all day picking apart various pieces of the testimony, the evidence, and so forth, let's just very quickly address a couple of the things that Emily seemed either most insistent about or which make the least sense. First, we've got Emily's claim that she believed Gabby to have died when she choked her with the wire, and hence it made sense to bury her for that reason. Well, naturally, I wasn't at the scene personally myself. From all that we know to be true, it seems more than obvious that Gabby was alive, and it seems like there's no way that the mother could have missed that aspect. Now, not that strangling her with electrical wire would have made it any less of a crime, but just she had to have known it, plain and simple. As Gabby's brother had attested to many times on record, his sister could be heard begging and screaming for help from inside the hole, even after the mother had finished filling it with dirt. He could furthermore still see her feet moving only moments before they supposedly piled back into the car and drove away, leaving the dying child behind. Then there's also the question of, if the mother believed her daughter to be dead, then what did she feel the need to return to the crime scene twice more after that for? Clearly, even as intoxicated as she most likely was, Emily knew very well that Gabby was very much alive when she started and continued pouring in the dirt to fill in the sides of that makeshift grave. As she danced the pizarro over and around her child's grave while her daughter could still be heard begging for mercy through the ground itself, the mother knew. She knew, and the unfortunate fact is that she simply didn't care. One of the next more questionable assertions the mother makes is that last remark wherein she insists this very day in court she's had absolutely zero knowledge of any type of sexual or otherwise dealt against Gabby by her husband. In fact, this is just coming as a total shocker for her today. Her own lawyers apparently didn't even bother to forewarn her about it. And of course, this also totally reeks of horse manure, and I'm being totally facetious when I say I agree that she didn't know, yada yada. It seems impossible she didn't know because, for one, the brother himself confirms knowledge of the abuse. As he told the cops from the get-go, the stepfather Gabby frequently. This just makes it really hard to believe that such a thing could be going on inside her very home, right under her very own nose, it would appear, and yet she, as a mother, wouldn't have even had the slightest ounce of a suspicion in this regard. There's another witness as well, an unnamed classmate of Gabby's who would also admit to authorities of having knowledge of that Gabby was falling victim to at home. This colleague states that it had been all the way back in 2019 that Gabby had confided to them what was going on. This person adds that they would have encouraged Gabby to go and tell somebody, the police or a teacher. except that the fear Gabby had expressed of how her mother might react was intense. It very much begs the question as to whether perhaps Gabby had tried approaching her mother before, only to have been met with an adverse reaction before. And finally, there are statements made by the mother herself, the threats she made, that she would kill or otherwise hurt Gabby if Gabby speak of the abuse again. Again, something that makes it impossible to believe that the mother had no knowledge of the assault at all. It's therefore at least my personal belief that the mother did know and perhaps was in denial for any multitude of reasons, or else perhaps she, once again, simply didn't care. In the end, it would take the jury of the Tres Lagoas court in Mato Grosso do Sul 7 hours of deliberation before, in January of 2022, they would hand down a verdict in the case of Emilade Magalhaes. Emilade was found unanimously guilty of murdering her own young daughter, and the then 31-year-old hairdresser would go on to be sentenced to 39 years, 8 months, and 4 days in prison for this absolutely pointless, horrific, and heartless crime. With that said, the sentence is, to me personally, a tragic and confusing slap on the wrist, to be perfectly honest. I'm not sure what factors played into deciding that the specific amount of time should be the amount of time this woman should spend behind bars, but to me, it seems incredibly lenient. Of course, it's a different country with a whole different judicial system, and it'd be interesting to find out sometime what role, if any, that difference played in Emilade's sentencing, but yet in the meantime, it's still bothersome in some way. Not only did the mother, high or not, have ample time and multiple occasions to think about what she was setting out to do and therefore stop herself from doing it, but there's just one more thought which absolutely just kills me about this particular case. It not only points to how much added and totally unnecessary suffering this child must have experienced, but also to the utterly callous nature of this woman's heart or lack thereof. And it has to do with Emilade's return to the burial site, namely that first time she did it, following the crime of burying her own daughter alive. Not only after having a significant amount of time to reflect on what she'd just done and start to feel some remorse about it, about what she put her own young and beautiful and 100% innocent daughter through, but what is so horrible is to picture what must have been going on through that little girl's mind when she heard that car engine as it got closer and closer, only to finally come to a stop right where she was at. She had to have felt some sense of hope and relief in thinking either that someone had found out and had clearly come now to rescue her, or else that most likely it was her very own mother coming to let her know she never really intended to leave her there, much less actually allow her to die, but had only intended to put a scare in her, to teach her a little lesson perhaps, as twisted as that sounds. But either way, in that fleeting moment in time, it's highly likely that Gabby felt as if she was not going to die after all, as if she was going to be saved and live. Imagine what a feeling that must be. Imagine the incredible measure of relief so intense that you or I, or most people, probably won't ever even begin to feel or experience or comprehend in our lifetimes. And then imagine minutes later hearing that car drive off again and knowing that in that moment that this is it, this is the place you're going to take your final breath and die. Imagine being a 10-year-old child trying to make any sort of sense of this. And as if that weren't enough, it's the mother you loved so much, she's the one that put you in here. Frankly, I don't feel as if there's even a word in the English language to adequately describe how tragic and frightening Gabby's final moments on this earth must have been. You guys, I'm afraid that it's actually on that terrible note that we're going to be wrapping this episode up. If you made it this far, I'm extremely grateful, and as depressing as I know this content is, believe me, I do hope that you're able to glean something positive from it, whatever that may be for you. Please don't forget to like the video, it really helps me out a lot, and subscribe to the channel as well if you haven't already. I don't have more to say about this case, except that maybe just to suggest that today, as cheesy as this is about to sound, go out and enjoy life in honor of Gabby, do something fun in honor of someone who no longer can. Besides that, of course, if you got anything you want to comment about, you're always welcome to discuss anything about the case right down below. Pretty much anything goes, just remember to be civil with each other, as I always say. But that's enough prattling on my part, so I do hope to see you back next time. Have a good one, and bye for now.